We talked extensively on yesterday's show about the most recent January 6th Select Committee hearing that happened yesterday, and a bunch of interesting stuff came out of it and was put forth during that hearing. But then also, there's a lot of interesting kind of aftermath related things we got to go through and other conversations around this as well. So the first is that Donald Trump just absolutely exploded, blew up about these hearings and dropped a 14-page document complaining about the fact that the election was stolen, that this is all a big political witch hunt, and also going through all of his claims of election fraud, trying to convince the chairman of the committee, Benny Johnson, that the election really was stolen. So all of this information you're sharing with the American people is horrible, truly unhinged. So take a look at this document. What was so funny about it to me was that he starts it all official. The Honorable Benny G. Thompson, chairperson, the Select Committee to investigate, blah, 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 right? Has his little seal up there, official as can be. And then you get down, Dear Chairman Thompson. And then in all caps, the presidential election of 2020 was rigged and stolen. And back to his Twitter rantings. And as I mentioned, super long. And then he goes through all these states and just lists off a bunch of bogus claims about why it was stolen. So you can tell he's panicking a little bit, and we'll get to later in the show a little bit of analysis about where his focus is right now. And while it does seem this is really enraging him, maybe it's not as much of a threat as the investigations, criminal and otherwise, into him are, and that's kind of where his head's at. The other aspect that was revealed, and then later in this segment we'll talk about if he's going to testify because he got subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. But first, one of the aspects that was discussed a little bit was the Secret Service documentation of their communications. Millions of communications were turned over to the January 6th committee, but because it's so much information, it's taking a while for them to go through it, so not much was revealed from that in this most recent hearing, but hopefully we'll get that at least in the final report. And Jake Tapper asked one of the members of the committee, Adam Kinzinger, about this, and here was his response.
Some suggestions today at the hearing that some individuals at the Secret Service, in the U.S. Secret Service, haven't told your committee the truth about whether or not there were any threats ahead of the insurrection. You showed evidence that there were some passed on by the FBI and others. And also other misrepresentations. Tell me more about that.
Look, I don't know what's going on in the Secret Service. There's, whether it's cultural issues, whether it's this desire to maintain secrecy. We know about the text messages that disappeared despite the preservation requests. You remember after Cassidy Hutchinson testified, what she had heard, it wasn't in there, but what she heard about happened in the limo. And you had these anonymous sources come out and say, that is being disputed in the Secret Service. Tony Ornato and everybody will testify. We said, great, come in. Never went in. Never came in. They never had, they didn't come in to talk to us. There are a lot of inconsistencies that we're going to continue to investigate, from things people have said to evidence that we have gotten. That will be either explored in the future or definitely in the report.
So interesting there. Just a lot of confusion there seems to be about the role that Secret Service played in all of this. What did they know? When did they know it? Why were they avoiding turning over certain bits of information? And why they deleted those batches of text messages, even though the January 6th committee said, hey, make sure that you keep all of this because it's going to be important for us to look over. So I'm not making any specific claim. I honestly don't know what their role would even have been. Maybe they're negligent in certain ways, not preparing properly, or participated in some kind of way, at least in their awareness. I don't know, but it's definitely confusing, and hopefully we'll get more information about that. Now, as we talked about, Trump was subpoenaed by the committee. That means they're saying you need to come in and testify, answer questions. And so the big question is, will he comply, or will he try to do what we've seen other people in his orbit do, which is avoid until there's a big public show of them being held in contempt? And it does seem, based on precedent, he could be, forced like everyone else, despite his status, to testify. Now, apparently, based on reporting, he's actually down with the idea, but he wants to do it live on TV, which makes sense, and not have to do the first round, at least behind closed doors, which is usually the way that goes. So here's a little bit about this, and then we'll look at Maggie Haberman speculating. It's unclear whether Mr. Trump will agree to a dramatic sit-down with investigators. Mr. Trump believes he is his own best spokesman and can explain his actions to anyone, and he often ignores the counsel of lawyers who would almost certainly tell him not to appear voluntarily. Since it became public that the House Select Committee planned to subpoena Trump for his testimony, the former president has been telling aides he favors doing so, so long as he gets to do it live. Telling aides he favors, I said that already. According to a person familiar with the discussions, however, it is unclear whether the committee would accept such a demand. So why would he want to do it live and not the proper way, which is not a big public show, at least at first? Well, because his whole idea would be to spew the same lies, to speak over everyone and try to claim the election was stolen and all that type of stuff. And if you're behind closed doors and the committee gets the final decision about which clips are released to the public, then you can't really do that. They can cut out you spewing all your lies and just get to the important parts that they want to ask you. Whereas live on TV, he can really use it as a political stunt. Now, I don't know if that would be beneficial to him, as Maggie Haberman and Jake Tapper speculate in this clip here.
That is actually one of the things that has animated him. He's been talking to advisors about how, he would consider testifying if they would air it live, which is also not surprising. It seems hard to imagine the committee would go for that. What he is very focused on right now is the other investigations that could lead to criminal charges. And that is still where much of his energy is focused. And for whatever reason, he is very focused on this lawsuit that's coming up next week where he has to be deposed, where he's being sued for defamation by E. Jean Carroll, a woman who has accused him of rape. The developments around January 6th, he considers those baked in. Everybody else does not, but he does.
That's interesting. Do you think his lawyers would let him testify live? I mean, I can't imagine that. I mean, it might feel good for him, but I can't imagine that making him look sane, rational, reasonable. I don't see any scenario in which he ends up looking good there.
I think that it would be, I also don't see a scenario where he doesn't potentially get himself into a fraud situation when he's testifying under oath. And I think it would depend on which lawyers he is listening to, Jake. He has different lawyers in different cases, and he seeks them out for different things, and they are not always on the same page.
Well, right, that's the thing, because he would be under oath. Often when he testifies under oath, he just ends up saying, I don't recall, I don't recall, I don't recall.
Right, so we'll stop it there. But I agree. I think if I were his lawyer, I would try to encourage him to stall as much as possible, because in my estimation, there's not much positive for him that could come out of him doing a big public show and being questioned, because they just have so much both in the moment that they could whip out to make him look bad, as well as context from all their past hearings and the ability to point back at all this plethora of information and say, listen, the American people already know what you're saying is lies. Now, I do think it would motivate his base, because he could say, oh, this is a political witch hunt, and they would go, yeah, go Trump. But I don't know if it would actually help him with the people that are being swayed by these hearings, if that makes sense. But very, very interesting stuff there.